SED and Ain have been at odds for as long as they can remember. On this particular day, Ain is yelling at him again for some reason. But Sito couldn't care less and tells her to leave him alone. This, of course, only escalates the argument. Ain's friend Himmer happens to come by and finds it amusing how these two are always bickering. But as she thinks about it, she starts to suspect that Ain might care a little too much about what SED does. And she begins to wonder if there's more to their dynamic than me the eye. Ain is appalled by the suggestion and vehemently denies having any feelings for SED, insisting she'd rather let a roach crawl into her ear than even consider dating him. SED, equally offended, scoffs at the idea of being with someone like her, and the two quickly launch into yet another argument. Once the school day is over, SED is on his way back home, but all of a sudden he gets a phone call from his grandpa. He answers, and his grandpa invites him to come have some tea with him at his house. But SED has better things to do, so he's not interested in going on a tea date with his grandpa. Grandpa reminds him that he already made S the heir to his company, so the least he could do is spend some time with his dear old papa while he's still alive. But even if SED doesn't want to, Grandpa knows a thing or two about kidnapping children. So he has a limo and some of his armed guards pull up beside SED. SED momentarily thinks about bolting like a track star, but quickly remembers that his grandpa is definitely unhinged enough to have him shot and sent straight to the hospital. Deciding it's not worth the risk, he reluctantly complies. He gets into the limo, and as the guards drive him, he asks where they're taking him. The guards, clearly sympathetic, admit they're aware their boss is being unreasonable. They explain that they've been ordered to bring SED to a villa, but they don't have any clue about what his grandpa has in mind. Sito's grandpa, Tenryu Hojo, once saved the Hojo Group from the brink of collapse, and under his leadership the Hojo Group became a global high-tech corporation. So it isn't a stretch to say that he's one of the richest and most powerful people in the world. And it may be hard to believe, but S's grandpa cares about his grandson more than anything, but Sat's father, on the other hand, seems to care a lot more about milk. Eventually they arrive at the house, and SED takes a seat outside waiting for his grandpa to show up. While he's sitting there, Ain unexpectedly appears, and the first thing she does is yell at him. She demands to know what he's doing there. So SED explains that his grandpa asked him to come. As it happens, Ain reveals that her grandma also invited her here for tea. The whole situation feels odd and neither of them has any idea what's going on. Despite the confusion, their mutual dislike takes over, and they start bickering as usual. Just then Sito's grandpa and Akane's grandma show up, and they've got something important to tell the two kids. So everyone heads inside. A feast has been prepared because the two grandparents want to celebrate, but SED has no idea what they are supposedly celebrating here. He also notices that Ain hasn't touched her food at all, so he asks if she's all right, but his concern is met with a roast because Ain says his ugly face made her lose her appetite. The two start arguing again, and both grandparents find it very amusing, since it reminds them of how they used to act when they were back in high school. SED, already fed up, finally asks them what they wanted to discuss. To his shock, the grandparents announce that Sito and Aiken are going to get married. Both SED and Aiken are stunned, convinced they must have misheard, because there's no way. Their grandparents just told them to get married, especially while they're still in high school. But much to their horror, the grandparents are completely serious about the arrangement. Tenryu and Shio have known each other since they were kids, and were even in love back then, but due to some petty arguments they ended up drifting apart. Tenryu and Shio both ended up marrying other people, but after a lifetime apart. Both of their partners are 6 feet under. So the two decided to reconnect, and ever since Tenryu has been blowing Shio's granny back out every night. Oh my god, wow. The point is, even though they're content with their lives now, they can't help but wonder how things might have turned out if they'd stayed together as a couple, when they were younger. And what better way to recapture their youth than by pushing their grandkids into the same situation and forcing them to get married. It might sound like a joke, but both grandparents are completely committed to this scheme. Ain objects to the marriage because marriage is something that's supposed to be done out of love, not because two old people want to watch their grandkids getting frisky. Plus, SED points out that it's literally illegal to force kids into marriage, and there's nothing Tenryu or Shio can do to make them agree to the marriage. Tenryu had expected that response, which is why he came prepared with some legal blackmail. He signals for the door to be opened and present SED with an ultimatum. Either he marries Ain or the dog dies. SED isn't particularly bothered, since it's not his dog. However, Tenryu raises the stakes by threatening to cut Sito out of his will and disown him as his heir. That's something Sito does care about. So he begins to consider that marrying Ain might not be the worst option. Ain, on the other hand, remains firmly opposed, insisting that if she's going to get married it will only be with someone she truly loves. Just then Shio calls Akane over. So Ain goes to her grandma's side and she whispers something into A's ear. Whatever she said must have been a serious threat, because it sends shivers down Ain's spine. Now that all the blackmail has been laid out, Tenryu says he is giving the two of them 3 days to decide whether they'll get married to each other or not. Then they zoom off, so Tenryu can blow Shio's back out again after their grandparents leave. Ain turns to Sed and asks what they're going to do, but neither of them has made up their mind yet. Foro getting disowned would be a serious problem, but he feels he needs more information. First, he asks Ain what kind of threat her grandma made, so he can gauge how bad her situation is. Ain, however, becomes defensive and refuses to share, insisting it's a private matter. Later that night, Ain is laying in bed and thinking about how she has never managed to outperform Sito. What pisses her off even more is the fact that he always beats her without even trying. She decides to call him to ask for advice on what she should do, and, after explaining the situation of being forced to marry someone she doesn't like, hypothetically, of course, him is shocked that things like this still happen. Ain then asks what him would do if she were in her shoes. Jaime replies that she would have to refuse because she already likes someone and could never imagine marrying anyone else. Ain is surprised to learn that him has a crush, as she's never mentioned it before, but him points out that it's only because Ain never asked. Curious Owen presses her for details, but him hesitates to reveal the guy's name for now, since she hasn't confessed her feelings to him yet, though she does admit it's someone from their class. They've talked about him's love life enough for one night. So him changes the subject, reject and asks Ain if she's in love with anyone. Ain has never had time to fall in love with someone before, and right now the only emotion Ain is feeling is a burning hatred for a certain someone. Since Ain doesn't have a crush or anything, Jaime thinks it would be fine if she just got married like their grandparents want. After all, assuming this hypothetical guy isn't a serial killer, they could just live together and split rent and bills. So it would be a great way for Ain to save on living EXP enzas, although she'd probably need to give birth to an heir at some point. So she might end up getting non-stop back shots to make that happen, and Akane doesn't think she could handle that. Meanwhile, back at home, Sed is spiraling into a panic attack, overwhelmed by the thought of dealing with Ain, not just at school but potentially every day if they end up married. The idea of being trapped with her constant nagging is unbearable. His cousin sure notices that something is clearly bothering him, so she asks, "What's wrong?" Sed explains that their grandpa is threatening to disown him if he doesn't comply with his demands. Shai isn't surprised. It's exactly the kind of thing their grandpa would do. So she asks Sed what he plans to do. She reassures him that she's perfectly okay with him giving up his claim to the company if that's what he decides. Even if he ends up homeless, she'll still love and support him the same. However, she also reminds him of his big dreams and points out that achieving them will likely require access to the Hojo Group's resources. No matter what decision he makes, she promises to stand by him and support him every step of the way. Sed is deeply grateful to have her in his corner. 3 days go by and both Sed and Akane meet with their grandparents because they've made their decisions. They're going to get married since that has been settled. S says he and Ain will file the paperwork for their marriage once they've graduated. But that's not good enough for their grandparents. They expect S and Akane to be in their lives as a married couple immediately. They even have a brand new house lined up for them, so they drop them off there and drive off. Ain starts panicking at the thought of suddenly having to live with Sed, while Sed, having grown used to his grandpa's antics, isn't even surprised by this turn of events. The two head inside, and if nothing else, Ain has to admit the house is actually pretty nice. She even thinks living here might be enjoyable if it weren't for the fact that she has to share the space with. The house is fully equipped with everything they could possibly need. But there's one glaring issue. There's only one bed. They call their grandparents to complain about the bed, but they intentionally set it up that way because they want S and Ain to sleep together. In fact, they're making it an official rule that Ain and Sed must sleep in the same bed every single night, and Shio wishes Ain luck with the inevitable pounding she'll receive. S realizes that their grandparents must have set up cameras in order to watch them at night, which is most definitely illegal, but he can't figure out where they put them. While Sed is preoccupied with worrying about the cameras, Ain is freaking out over the idea of having to share the same bed with him. She nervously asks if he's really planning to go through with it tonight, but S is completely clueless about what she means. Embarrassed, Ain starts yelling, convinced he's planning to double stuff her all night until she can't even walk. Sed, utterly baffled by her train of thought, firmly denies having any such intentions. Despite his reassurances, Ain remains suspicious and threatens to stab him with her comically large pencil if he tries anything before storming out of the bedroom. For now, they still need to get their stuff unpacked, so Ain is carrying her stuff upstairs. That box looks pretty heavy, so S asks if she needs any help. Ain rejects his offer because she thinks S just wants to get a hold of her stuff so he can do pervy stuff with it. Besides Ides, she's perfectly capable of doing it by herself. If she doesn't want his help, SED isn't going to force the issue. After taking a few steps, Ain loses her footing and falls backward. Thankfully, she wasn't falling with an umbrella. So SED catches her, and she's perfectly safe. He asks that she be a little more careful, because if she ends up getting herself killed, he'll become the prime murder suspect. Once everything is unpacked, SED discovers a meal. His grandpa left behind for him while Tenri you can be a pain. This gesture is surprisingly thoughtful. After warming up the pizza, SED is ready to dig in, but Ain catches a whiff of the food and realizes how hungry she is too proud to ask for a slice. She simply stares, not wanting her to go hungry. Sito reluctantly offers her a piece. Ain takes it without hesitation, but immediately walks off without so much as a thank you. A few minutes later, SED is ready for bed, so he heads into the bedroom and lays down to go to sleep. But then Ain comes in, and he remembers that they have to share the bed. They both agreed that they weren't going to do anything, but there's no way SED can fall asleep like this. To distract himself, he starts a conversation and asks Ain why she agreed to this marriage, but she still doesn't want to give any details about her reasons. This marriage is just a formality, so Ain tells herself she'll have to endure it for the sake of her dream, even if it means complying with their grandparents' bizarre rules. Suddenly, SED has a troubling thought. If their grandparents can invent rules whenever they feel like it, it's only a matter of time before they come up with one about the two of them having kids. Akane realizes he has a point and starts to panic. In the midst of her freak out, SED accidentally touches her butt, which immediately sparks yet another argument between them, which brings us back to the present, where Ain firmly reminds SED that under no circumstances is he allowed to tell anyone they're married. SED assures her that he has no intention of letting the secret slip, but Ain remains skeptical. After all, what kind of guy wouldn't want to boast about marrying someone like her? Watch this next video on screen and subscribe to not miss next part.